Imagine living in a world where your deepest fears, emotional pain, and even your very existence could be dismissed as a mental disorder simply because you're a woman. Hey, it's Aaliyah from Ladies First, and today we're diving into the terrifying and tragic history of hysteria and its portrayal in Robert Eggers' Nosferatu. But first, let's unpack just how women were diagnosed, pathologized, and silenced in the past. By the 19th century, hysteria had become a catch-all diagnosis for a host of unexplained nervous symptoms, almost exclusively in women. Women diagnosed as hysterical might faint, go into wild convulsions, experience temporary paralysis, or exhibit erratic emotional outbursts, all without any detectable physical disease. The term hysteria itself has ancient roots, derived from hystera, the Greek word for uterus. For millennia, physicians from antiquity through the Victorian era believed that a wandering womb inside the woman's body caused these symptoms. As late as the 19th century, one could find echoes of this theory. Victorian women prone to fainting would carry smelling salts, believing the pungent odor could drive the wandering uterus back to its proper place and revive them. Though laughable by modern standards, this idea persisted for centuries. Hysteria was deeply gender-biased. It was considered the first mental disorder specifically attributed to women. 19th century doctors and society at large assumed that women were inherently more fragile, emotional, and prone to irrationality due to their biology. Victorian ideals of femininity, which emphasized women as gentle domestic wives and mothers, fed into medical assumptions. In many cases, a woman's genuine distress, be it postpartum depression, trauma, or simply frustration with her limited role, was dismissed as the fanciful melodrama of a nervous female mind. This gendered bias had severe consequences. Once a woman was branded hysterical or insane, male authority figures, such as doctors or husbands, could justify taking control of her life. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, treatments for hysteria ranged from the benign to the oppressive, often without modern consent. Women deemed hysterical were frequently institutionalized in asylums, where they had little agency and could be kept in chains or restrained for months. Another common treatment was the rest cure, where women were isolated, forced into bed rest, and kept from intellectual or social activity. As Charlotte Perkins Gilman described her experience, "I was put to bed and kept there. I was fed, bathed, and rubbed. After a month of this, he sent me home with this prescription. Live as domestic a life as possible, lie down an hour after each meal, and never touch pen, brush, or pencil as long as you live." The rationale was that a woman's overactive mind or ambition had caused her illness, so absolute physical and mental inactivity would restore her health. In reality, this treatment often compounded the patient's misery, with women feeling infantilized and cut off from activities that gave their lives meaning. Gilman's experience inspired her famous short story, The Yellow Wallpaper, which portrays the rest cure as a form of psychological torture. Some doctors even resorted to gynecological surgery, such as removing ovaries or performing hysterectomies, believing a woman's reproductive organs caused her mental illness. These surgeries were often done without true consent, with husbands or fathers signing off, and amounted to medically sanctioned assault and mutilation. While hysteria became more medicalized, older demological beliefs persisted. Women displaying hysterical symptoms might still be accused of witchcraft or thought to be demonically possessed. Such women were often punished and purified with fire for their association with sorcery. In the 1800s, the demological view faded among educated doctors but persisted in cultural memory. In some cases, a hysterical fit might prompt calling a priest for an exorcism instead of a physician. Interestingly, this blend of science and superstition is explored in Nosferatu. Eggers' Nosferatu is set in the early 19th century, the 1830s in this adaptation, and places Ellen Hutter at the center of both a vampire's curse and a deeply patriarchal medical system. From the very outset, the film signals that Ellen's society views her through the lens of hysteria. We learn that Ellen, a young newlywed, has a history of nervous afflictions. Her first encounter with Count Orlok in her youth left her mentally scarred and labeled as hysterical. Her husband, Thomas Hutter, is protective of her, partly for this reason. As the story begins, Ellen begs Thomas not to leave on his business trip to Transylvania, tearfully afraid of relapsing into her dark visions. Thomas reassures her, indicating that his presence usually keeps her calm. This dynamic immediately reflects a historical reality. women deemed hysterical were often treated like dependent children, their well-being supposedly contingent on a stable home and husband. Once Thomas departs, Ellen's worst fears come true. Through a kind of psychic link to the approaching vampire Count Orlok, she experiences horrific nightmares, hallucinations, and nocturnal fits. In one harrowing scene, Ellen's body contorts during a seizure. She jerks and arches off the bed so violently that only her head and heels touch the mattress, forming an inverted U-shape. This exact posture, known in neurological literature as arch of the circle, is something no modern viewer would guess was real, yet it is drawn straight from 19th century medical accounts. The French neurologist Jean-Martin Charcot, in his famous Salpêtrière hospital demonstrations, often observed hysterical women assuming a rigid archback position during fits. Charcot even photographed and drew these hysterical poses, cataloging them in clinical studies. Production hired a movement coach and used Charcot's 19th century illustrations as reference for Ellen's physical performance. The medical response to Ellen's condition in the film is equally steeped in 19th century reality. When her episodes begin, the local physician, Dr. Wilhelm Sievers, takes charge. Dr. Sievers is depicted as a respectable country doctor and director of the town hospital who embodies the conventional wisdom of his time. Upon observing Ellen's wild behavior and hearing her feverish talk of a looming evil, Dr. Sievers promptly diagnoses her with hysteria. Dr. Sievers fits the profile of the 19th century male doctor who sees a woman's suffering not as a credible report of external danger, but as an internal flaw, too much passion, blood, or even imagination for her delicate female constitution. In the film, we see Sievers and others tie Ellen to the bedposts with cloth bindings and administer ether as a sedative, effectively chemically straitjacketing her. Eggers doesn't stop at showing the conventional treatment. He introduces another character who challenges the diagnosis, which allows the film to explore the era's split between scientific and supernatural interpretations of such phenomena. Enter Professor von Franz, a character clearly modeled on Dr. Abraham Van Helsing from Bram Stoker's Dracula. Von Franz is Dr. Sievers' mentor and is called in as a specialist when Sievers feels out of his depth. What's notable is that von Franz is both a genius physician and an investigator of the occult. Late 18th and 19th centuries had a strain of learned men fascinated by the border of science and the supernatural. In Nosferatu, von Franz examines Ellen and disagrees with his pupil's diagnosis. Within the film's narrative, von Franz is correct. Ellen's visions are caused by the very real vampire stalking her, but such a declaration stuns the other characters, as it flies in the face of modern medical thinking. Eggers dives deep into the history of mental illness by showing how an ostensibly enlightened doctor might still resort to an older demological explanation. This clash, hysteria versus possession, mirrors the 19th century transition from seeing unexplainable behaviors as supernatural afflictions to treating them as medical disorders. In the film, we briefly return to the pre-scientific view. Rather than a brain disease or a wandering womb, Ellen's torment is something beyond the material world. A final comparison lies in Ellen's fate versus that of historical hystericals. Ellen ultimately becomes the agent of resolving the crisis. In line with the classic story, she plays a pivotal role in confronting Count Orlok. Eggers' Ellen is portrayed as having psychic gifts and a determination that grows through the film, allowing her to resist both her medical oppressors and the vampire's domination until she ultimately sacrifices herself to save everyone. Whereas in real life, many were simply forgotten or silenced. Historically, women who suffered under the label of hysteria rarely got such a heroic arc. Most either lived out quiet lives if they recovered or languished in institutions if they did not. In conclusion, Nosferatu uses the lens of horror to shine light on a real horror in history, the oppressive treatment of women deemed hysterical. It reminds us that in a time not so distant, a woman's real cries could be dismissed as fantasy, and she could be bound down just as surely as any vampire's victim. Nosferatu invites viewers to ponder how often truth has been stranger and even darker than fiction. If this deep dive into the dark history of hysteria and its portrayal in Nosferatu intrigued you, let's keep this important conversation going in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Ladies First.